Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Chicago Health Justice Forum, Housing Equity and Just Cause for Eviction. My name is Wesley Epplin. I serve as the Director of Health Equity at Health and Medicine Policy Research Group. I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. Health and Medicine recognizes and acknowledges that we live and work in the land of the Peoria, Miami, Kickapoo, and Potawatomi nations. These lands were the traditional territory of these Native nations prior to their forced removal. They continue to carry the stories of their struggles for survival and identity today on these and other lands. As an organization located in Chicago within the state of Illinois, we are obligated to hold these histories and contemporary struggles in our mind today as we talk about community, belonging, and health. For housekeeping. And so again, welcome to the Chicago Health Justice Forum. This webinar is being recorded. Again, my name is Wesley Epplin, and I'm the Director of Health Equity at Health and Medicine Policy Research Group. We want to welcome you to please introduce yourselves in the chat so that others know you are here. For those who you've just joined, welcome to the Chicago Health Justice Forum. The webinar is being recorded. Please place any questions for the Q&A during the session into the Q&A section, not in the chat. We will answer as many possible questions during the last 15 minutes of the forum. As a reminder, all participants will be emailed a copy of the slides from the presentation along with other materials and a short post-forum evaluation. Our Q&A session will begin toward the end of this session. So again, as questions come to you, please share them in the Q&A section. You can also introduce yourselves in the chat. Feel free to share your name, gender pronouns, your title, and organization. I'll share mine. Mine are he and him. Please place any questions for the Q&A in the Q&A during the session. For an agenda today, so I have the introduction right now, then I'm going to go through a summary of links from eviction and housing insecurity to public health. So why are we talking as a public health and healthcare focused nonprofit about housing and evictions, and what's the connection there? We'll then hear from Margie O'neill, who's a student at National Louis University, about a personal experience with evictions. We want to center today's discussion in that personal experience. We want to also have a review of the Just Cause to Evict ordinance from Frank Avalone, who's an attorney at the Lawyers Committee for Better Housing, and then action opportunities with the Chicago Housing Justice League to advance this ordinance from Antonio Gutierrez. And finally, as I mentioned, we'll have a Q&A and opportunities to hear from our panelists questions that have come up from the discussion. A little about Health and Medicine. Health and Medicine's mission is to promote the health of all Illinoisans by advancing health equity. You can follow us on social media at the links at the bottom of this slide. This is our 40th anniversary this year, so we're celebrating that and are just so glad that you've joined us today. So thank you for joining us. As an announcement, Health and Medicine and the Collaborative for Health Equity Cook County are supporting our southeast side hunger strikers who are demanding clean air and pushing the Lightfoot administration, the Chicago Department of Public Health, to deny the permit for the General Iron metal scrapper being moved from, proposed to be moved from Lincoln Park to the east side community area. There's an opportunity to sign on. Here's the link for that, and we'll share this with you after the forum. There's also a one-day solidarity fast this Friday, tomorrow. We'll have a Zoom check-in at 12 noon. And again, here's a link for that. And at the bottom, more information on these two actions, and you can contact me at that email address if you have questions or want to get involved with that. The Chicago Housing Justice League is our a coalition that Health and Medicine is a part of and is partnering on this event. The league was founded in 2018 and is a collaborative of 37 groups convened by the Lawyers Committee for Better Housing. one of the efforts of the League is to pass the Just Cause to Evict ordinance, which is what we're here to talk about today. For objectives, after this forum, we hope that you'll be able to describe the eviction problem in Chicago and its relationship to public health, to list the main components of the Just Cause to Evict ordinance, and to engage in advocacy activities in support of the Just Cause to Evict ordinance. I just want to emphasize this last point on action. We want you to learn about the issue, learn about the ordinance, but also to engage. We really need all hands on deck to get this ordinance passed. So we hope you'll join either as your organization, joining us if you're not already, or engage with us as an individual. And we'll hear more on opportunities on that front later in the forum. So why focus on evictions as a public health issue? One, housing is a key social determinant of health. Evictions result from and worsen structural racism, class inequity, and gender inequities, among other forms of oppression. And these are root causes of health inequities. So health equity is what public health is all about. And if you're in public health or healthcare or racial justice focused organization, this issue of evictions is very pertinent. And to advance health equity, really, we need housing that is accessible and equitable, and that's safe and healthy and affordable. And evictions comes into play in addressing these 5 issue areas of housing. Last summer, my former colleague, Meredith Hollander, worked with me and with several others in the Justice League on this fact sheet. We'll share it with you after the presentation today. And it's focused on the public health implications of evictions. I'm not a housing researcher, neither is Meredith, but we were able to sum up what housing and eviction focused researchers have said as it relates to public health. So evictions lead to worsened living conditions, including poor quality housing, and in some cases, homelessness. And so I don't want to overcomplicate this relationship to health, because I think all of us have some sort of understanding of this, that we need shelter to be healthy, and we need housing, or a home rather, as a place to live our lives, and a place to connect with others and to be connected to our community. Eviction patterns also, again, reflect structural racism and class inequity and other oppression. I can't emphasize this enough, that these are root causes of health inequity. We say those words a lot, but what does that really mean? Evictions is one of the mechanisms of reflecting that, but also exacerbating these forms of oppression. And so for us to protect against eviction is a way of redressing those inequities. Experiencing and worrying about the possibility of eviction can be stressful. Evictions can contribute to mental health problems, and also financial instability in terms of costs of losing belongings, of moving and furnishing a new home. We'll talk more about that later. Evictions can also, again, be linked to homelessness. And I think all on this call know that homelessness is linked to poor health. Evictions harm mothers, infants, and children. Maternal depression is one issue that came up frequently in the research we read. They harm academic performance for anyone who's in school, especially children, and can lead to reduced educational attainment and behavioral problems as well. Evictions and frequent moving negatively impact children's health and well-being, and housing insecurity is a cause and outcome of adverse childhood experiences. Evictions are, again, linked to structural inequity. So it can lead to displacement and community destabilization, and that loss of community connections, as we talked about. So the relationships that people have with neighbors, with the institutions and organizations in their neighborhood, the places they go for their day-to-day needs. It can reduce people's feelings of belonging and connection. Eviction also contributes to population loss. Obviously, Chicago has lost, it has been losing population, and it's been disproportionately impacting Black and Brown communities and people living in poverty. And again, this is structural racism in action, and evictions are one mechanism of that, and one that we can, through policy, redress. This is a busy slide, but just to walk through it, this is a model for the social determinants of health from the World Health Organization. I'm going to walk through a few circles. So the blue circle is material circumstances. So that would, here we're talking about housing. On the left-hand side, we're talking about public policy to make sure that people can have housing. In the middle is this red circle, social cohesion and social capital. So this model really does lay out the role that power plays in the degree to which people can demand their human rights. And so that's that quote from this report from the World Health Organization, that power is a central component of that. And so the Chicago Housing Justice League is one place where people can build that power to counter the vested interests that want to keep the ability to evict people without cause in place, and who profit from that. And they benefit from being able to evict people, which, as we just discussed, has vast public health harms. So to summarize, evictions harm the physical and mental health of people who are directly impacted, the health of their families and the broader community, and this larger pattern of health inequity in our city. They disrupt community connections, worsen power inequities, and structural inequities. This is an urgent public health and housing justice issue. And without urgent action, thousands of Chicago residents, children, and families will be displaced each year, as they have been for many years. Next, I'm going to introduce our next panelist. Let's see. So our next panelist is Margie O'Neill. Margie is, we just had an opportunity to speak yesterday. Margie is a student at National Louis University studying to be a school counselor. And she's here to, again, share with us her experience with eviction, to center the conversation in that personal experience with this issue. It looks like she's connecting to audio, so we'll wait a moment. So we'll wait a minute to see if Margie is able to join us. And if she's not, then we will change the order of our speakers and have her follow up later. So we'll just wait a few more moments and see if she is able to join. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to skip Margie for the moment and come back to her. So we'll ask Frank Avallone from the Lawyers Committee for Better Housing to share a bit more about the Just Cause to Evict ordinance. Frank?
Well, thank you, Wesley. I certainly want to thank Health and Medicine Policy Research Group for the invitation, the opportunity to address everybody today. And just let me quick ask, can everybody hear me all right? Am I coming through fine?
Yes.
Good, thank you. So if you need me to tune it up or tune it down, let me know. So in the brief time allotted that I've been given here, I want to give you sort of a rapid fire sense of why just cause for eviction is important and what our particular bill currently pending in City Council, and more particularly before the City Council Committee on Housing and Real Estate, is all about. So real quick, a brief history lesson. As you can guess, the control of land has historically, for thousands of years, been the situs of economic and political power in Western culture and in many other cultures. Here in the United States, historically, and in Illinois in particular, since the, ready for this, Northwest Territories Ordinance of 1787, the control of landlord-tenant relationships is long and deep and runs hundreds of years. Traditionally, and still is the case in Illinois and in Chicago, A landlord can terminate the landlord-tenant relationship for any reason at all or no reason at all. So they can terminate the month-to-month tenancy. They cannot renew written rental agreements and don't need any reason at all to do that. That is the historical and traditional rule across the United States that over the last number of decades has been wearing away and been carving out exceptions to it because it recognizes the tremendous fundamental unfairness and economic disparity that it creates. So as long as the landlord gives a proper predicate notice telling the tenant that they're being compelled to move, they don't need to give a reason. If the tenant doesn't move within the allotted time, historically it was 30 days. The law passed last summer, that time period's expanded a little bit, but traditionally 30 days. Then the landlord can file an eviction case against you. Eviction cases in the courts of Cook County and indeed across the country are speedy summary procedures that deliberately, as a matter of policy for over 250 years, are designed to give speedy recovery of land back to the owner. In Chicago, particularly since the court's 2014 changes in procedure, almost all of Chicago's eviction cases are over with in a period of 1 to 3 months. That's the time frame. Now, it used to be before 2014, they could be over with longer than that if your lawyer was clever and knew how to play the game. But the fact of the matter is now, the lion's share of evictions are over with in 1 to 3 months. Most of them are over with in 1 to 2 months. After a judge issues an eviction order, the sheriff comes out to your house about 2 to 3 weeks later and forcibly removes everybody in the home and locks them out. Now, before budget cuts of about 10 years ago, the sheriff would also set your stuff to the street corner. That doesn't happen anymore. We don't have the money to pay the sheriff to do that anymore. So now they just lock you out. And whether or not you can get to your stuff is kind of up between you and your landlord. So no fault and no cause terminations and evictions account for about 6,000 eviction cases every single year in the city of Chicago. In the Chicago courts, there's about an average of 23,000 eviction cases filed every single year. About 25% of those are no fault, no cause. You can look at the lcbh.org website at our eviction data portal, as well as the Just Cause Chicago website for information and data about that. So about 6,000 eviction cases, families cut loose every single year through no fault of their own. Now, there is a huge swatch of people that when they get the eviction notice or the termination notice or the non-renewal notice, their lives are thrown into a tailspin, but they don't want to deal with the formality of eviction court and the fear and the difficulty and the damage to credit report that happens from that. So they frequently will move in haste, live doubled up with friends or relatives, abandon much of their personal property. And so the number of people who are actually displaced every single year in Chicago through absolutely no fault of their own is at least 10,000 families. Now, what's the real number? Nobody knows. So these are educated guesses, but you can see that the impact is rather dramatic. We know that no fault and no cause terminations are the primary vehicle of displacement. It's used by gentrifiers, it's used by flippers, it's used by landlords who are attempting to mask or hide illegal discrimination, race discrimination, religious discrimination, immigrant status discrimination, or used as a mask to mask retaliation. So if your building is in a rundown condition and a couple of the tenants get together and say to the landlord, hey, why don't you fix the heat, or why don't you fix the problem with roaches or water problems, et cetera. Some landlords don't want to do the repairs, and so they'll use no fault or no cause termination as a way of removing the tenants. Even though retaliation is defense to eviction, it is nearly impossible to prove in court. Eviction court is the worst place in the world for tenants to try to stand up for themselves. So raise your hand if you think you could get up and move with all of your possessions and your neighborhood and your kids' school and your church and your friends and your relatives around you. If you can do that on 30-day notice, raise your hand. Of course, I can't see any of you, so maybe none of you have your hand up, but okay, you can get the idea about how difficult this is. All right, so what does just cause for eviction do? Nationwide and in our bill in particular, number one, it puts a stop to no fault, no cause terminations, no fault, no cause non-renewals, and no fault, no cause evictions. If a landlord wants you out of the premises, they are going to need to have one of the 7 reasons listed in our law. And 3 of those 7 reasons have to do with traditional tenant fault, like non-payment of rent, disturbing your neighbors, damaging the property, all those traditional reasons that landlords have when they have cause or reason to want you to leave. But 4 of the 7 reasons are things that have nothing to do with the tenant at all. They're just traditionally recognized as legitimate reasons that the landlord might want the property back. And they are condominium conversion, substantially rehabilitating or repairing the building, removing the rental unit from the market, or if the owner desires to move in a qualified family member or friend. So for example, if Wesley had a 3-flat and he needed his adult daughter and their 2 children to move in there in a time of COVID, that would be a legitimate reason to ask the tenant to move. But in our bill, whenever the tenant is asked to move for a reason that is not the tenant's fault, then the landlord is compelled to pay relocation assistance to make that transition more humane. After all, the tenant's done nothing to provoke this. You have to remember that we're not talking about 19-year-old college students that might be living in a place for a short period of time. The lion's share of tenants, even month-to-month tenants, have been living in the same property for years and years and years, and indeed many decades. Just by way of a quick story, I recently represented a 93-year-old African-American woman who lived in the 3rd story of a 3-story walk-up on a month-to-month tenancy for 34 years. So those kind of very long residencies is not uncommon. Chicago has 600,000 rental units. 1.34 million Chicagoans are renters. That means well over half of Chicagoans are renters. Okay, let me move on real quickly here and say that just cause is not only a matter of fundamental fairness, it is also a matter, as Wesley says, of racial justice. And Wesley, if you could put up the slide, please, that shows when you go into the LCBH eviction data portal and you take a look at what neighborhoods are most heavily impacted by evictions, and here we're not even talking about terminations where people have already moved without an eviction being filed against them, but just the evictions. Here's the top 10 list. Here's the top 10 list. And as you can see down that list, they're almost all African-American neighborhoods. Yeah. And we know that about 200,000 African-Americans have left Chicago in the last decade, about 30,000 Latinx. So just cause for eviction is a matter of racial justice as well. Now, I want to end real quickly here. I would like to at least personally argue that in the era of the Anthropocene, this era of climate change, and in this particular stage of our democracy in America, I believe that basic human needs should now be human rights. This is not an outrageous idea. This is being done and implemented all over the world. The fact that it feels odd to Americans is because of the uniqueness of our culture. But I believe the basic human needs should be human rights. So medical care, utility service, housing. So from a global perspective, our motto is housing is a human right, not merely a commodity to maximize profit. So it's a change in that historical dynamic. And if you look at housing as a human right, then the very first principle of that right, whatever else is part of that right, the very first principle has to be security of tenure. What do I mean? That a family ought to have a sense that they can lay down roots and remain a member of a neighborhood and participate in that neighborhood and be integrated into that neighborhood, absent a good and compelling reason that forces them to leave. Just cause then is one important piece of a larger puzzle that promotes neighborhood stability, that slows the pace of displacement and gentrification, and thereby gives residents, landlords and tenants alike, a long-term stake in the well-being of that community. I just want to say, and Wesley, if you could turn to the other slide about jurisdictions, just cause is not unusual. Many times, people in the trade associations of the property owners industry always like to, when asked about something new or different, a new program, a new initiative, they always like to scream and yell about unforeseen consequences. Well, there are no unforeseen consequences here. Let's just look real quickly at all the laws in the United States, all the places in the United States. First, about 50,000 of Chicago's existing rental units have been under a just cause regime for decades. All the conventional public housing, all the project-based subsidies to private landlords, all the tax credit programs, they've been under a just cause regime for decades. It's not unusual, it's not new. The judges, the landlords know how to handle that. But then when we go on, Leslie, to the next slide real quick, 4 states, the entire state has just cause for eviction. California went from having 27 cities with just cause, then in 2019, the entire state. Now just think about that. The entire state, the largest state in the United States, the 5th largest place in the world, or something like that. I can't remember the data, but we're talking about hundreds of thousands of rental units here. The state of New Hampshire, the state of New Jersey, the state of Oregon. I like to think that Washington, D.C., next slide, please, Leslie. I like to think of Washington, D.C. as a state, but, you know, I guess we lost that fight 40 years ago. But you can see that there's other cities as well, Philadelphia, Portland, Seattle, Washington, D.C. And I would like to say that starting March 1st, St. Paul, Minnesota. So just cause is not new. It's not unusual. We know how it works. Nobody goes out of business. Nobody, bizarre and strange things don't happen to the economy. We're simply talking about here stabilizing neighborhoods and giving our fellow citizens and our fellow residents a sense of commitment and permanency to the place that they live, the place that they call home. Thank you, Wesley. Appreciate the time.
Thank you very much, Frank. Really appreciate the presentation, and I always feel like I learn something every time I hear you present on this or other topics. So thank you very much. We're now joined by Margie O'Neill, who's called in. I think she was having trouble with her computer connecting to the Zoom call, but she's joined us via phone. Margie, I had introduced you earlier. I'm not sure if you could hear me then, so I'll introduce you again for the group on the forum, the call. So Margie O'Neill is a student at National Louis University studying to be a school counselor, and I was here to help us center this conversation in personal experience with this issue. So Margie, thank you for joining us.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Okay, we were served a 30-day notice in the building that we lived in, which is pretty hard to do. You know, my thing was, okay, what is this for? It just came out the clear blue. We had no knowledge, anything. So they set up a meeting. So I met with the owners of the property, and, you know, I explained to them, it takes time to look for an apartment. 30 days is just simply not enough time. Moving expenses, you know, no one's working right through here through this pandemic. So how do you expect us to move? So I reached out to the Metropolitan Tenants Organization. I explained to them what the problem was, what was going on. So they immediately came in and we started meeting with them. So at that point, they were like, well, can you get some other people in the building? So I started reaching out to everybody in the building, you know, letting them know we have this organization that's willing to help us, that's willing to stand up for us. So we need to, you know, get on these calls and try to get this thing together. In the meantime, the landlord or property manager of the building did come back and say, well, we might be able to help you. But at that point, we were like, well, no, we're going to let the Metropolitan Tenants Organization come into the midst and represent us. So a lot of the people, at first, some of the people were a little skeptical. I'm like, we all have to stick together and we have to stand. You know, there is an ordinance that, you know, they're working on, and, you know, we didn't do anything wrong. We need the help. So let's get with this organization and make this happen. So that's when we started working with the tenants' rights, and they stepped in and contacted the landlord. And we tried to, you know, work with them over and over again, but they were kind of not budging. So when the tenants' rights took over, they got paperwork together, letters and things of that nature. So in the end, they did give us the moving fees, you know, for your truck, for your security. So everyone is grateful for the Metropolitan Tenants Organization, because if it hadn't been for them, they just wanted to just like 30 days, you got to move. That's it. No help. No, then when the tenants organization took over, they started trying to look for apartments in the neighborhood. They tried to help a little bit at that point. But if it was not for the Metropolitan Tenants Organization, I don't know where we would be. Most of the people that lived in buildings, a lot of them were older, some younger, but moving is a hassle. We were so stressed because of this move, because we didn't know where we were going to go or what we were going to do. And I'm so thankful for the Metropolitan Tenants Rights Organization for stepping in, and they took us every step of the way. Like I said, from contacting the different landlords, from contacting, telling us which steps to do. No, don't do this like this. Let us handle this. We're going to talk to them. And then we got the owners of the building, the Tenants Rights Organization, and plus all of the tenants in the building. We all got together on one call. And at that point, they made us an offer. And again, that's the way we were able to handle this, to move out of this particular property.
Margie, thank you for sharing your story. And I know we'll have some questions for you during the Q&A, but I just want to thank you for being with us today and sharing your story. And I'm so sorry that happened. And I am glad that the NGO was able to provide support. But I think what your story highlights for me is that people shouldn't have to go through that. And we should have policies like just cause to evict to protect against that kind of situation from happening.
Yes.
Thank you, and we look forward to having a discussion and Q&A with you during the question and answer session.
You're welcome.
So I'm going to ask Antonio Gutierrez from Autonomous Tenants Organization to join, to do his pitch for getting involved with the Chicago Housing Justice League on Just Cause to Evict. Antonio, welcome.
Yes, thank you, Wesley, and thanks everybody for being here today, right, to do this virtual forum to get more information about Just Cause. Stated, my name is Antonio. My preferred pronouns are they, them, theirs. I'm one of the co-founders of the Autonomous Tenants Union, and I also consider myself an anti-displacement organizer, as I am an undocumented immigrant, also supporting individuals facing deportation is another form of displacement. And currently I sit as a co-chair of the action committee for the Chicago Housing Justice League. And we have the task, right, of kind of engaging in action and making sure that other people, our city council feels the pressure in order to pass Just Cause and understands the need of it in our community. We are currently targeting specific older people in the housing committee because the bill is actually sitting right now in the housing committee, as Frank mentioned, and we actually only have 8 out of the 19, or 8 other people are supporting of Just Cause out of the 19 that formed the housing committee in itself. And so we still have a little bit of work to do, especially convincing Alderman Osterman of the 48th Ward, who is actually the chair of the housing committee. and who currently kind of is preventing the bill from actually being discussed in the committee to begin with. And so the ways that we're doing those calls to action is that we're actually putting a lot of images, graphics on our social media platforms for the Housing League and the many other 37 organizations that are part of the League in order to get individuals that live within those wards, right, to call their alderperson and to try to like make sure that they know that their constituents want just cause to happen, that they need those protections out of kind of the expectation, right, that currently we have all these eviction moratoriums both at the federal, state level, city level sometimes. But those moratoriums are gonna end, and potentially we might be facing the worst housing crisis yet in the United States if something is not to be done, or there are no protections like just cause to kind of prevent mass displacement of our community members. And that mass displacement was occurring even before the pandemic, right? And it still occurs even during the pandemic of COVID-19. The calls to action that we're doing, right, are kind of these call scripts, phone banking to these other people. And we're also asking individuals, especially constituents of these specific other people, to also find a way to virtually or in some physical way, right, wherever feels safe to you in the middle of the pandemic, to virtually attend your other people's events, war nights, voice the need for just cause in any way that you can. And of course, we invite all of you to join the campaign. We have here the justcausechicago.org website, and you click on the first page, you'll see this button that is shown on the screen saying join the campaign. You can actually put your information, and one of the Housing League's organizers will actually contact you to kind of make sure that you know more information about it, find ways of plugging in into the campaign, find the information about your alderperson so you can contact them and at least make a call at the minimum. But there are many multiple ways, from like how to join the action committee, right? Plug in into the media committee, or just want to maybe share your story of eviction and forced displacement that you have suffered, as we just heard. And so that's kind of all we had. I think we are in a time crunch, in my opinion, right, to make this happen. And the first step is really to get this bill out of the Housing Committee of City Council and then put it into a vote. Right now, we're still not having, as I stated, kind of that support that we really need in order to pass this, including the support from the mayor's office. And so that is another target that we hope individuals here, right, if it is just the minimum call to your alderperson or to the mayor's office, we hope that everybody here can agree that just cause will be a benefit to all tenants, and not just tenants, but to the overall social fabric of our communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Antonio. I'm gonna go ahead and stop my share for the Q&A session. So again, the Q&A the Q&A box is where to enter questions. If you're here as an audience member, please feel free to add those questions into the Q&A box. I know we have a couple in there already. One that I really want to pose to Margie from John Bartlett, who works at the Metropolitan Tenants Organization, is the director there. And as part of the Chicago Housing Justice League. John asked Margie if you could share a bit about what it costs to move and how has moving affected your schooling and your work.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. That was my schooling. It was hard because I was trying to look for a place, trying to stay, trying to study, trying to do the work online. It was very stressful for me. The cost was hard too, because depending on what type of area you're trying to move in, or if you know, a lot of us had to end up downsizing. We loved the apartments that we had. They were very big, spacious, and the majority of us ended up downsizing to a smaller apartment. A lot of us still had to put like half of our belongings and furniture and stuff in storage because we were trying to, you know, meet the time frame in order for us to move out of the building. It was stressful, but able to get it did.
Thank you for sharing that. I was curious, have you been able to remain in touch with your neighbors from the building? And
I have two of the tenants that I remain in contact with to this day. They did find apartments because, you know, we left at different times. One of the tenants there, she's currently staying with someone because she has a daughter, and her daughter is handicapped. So she has to be in a building that has a ramp. She wants a high-rise building, so to get her daughter, you know, to and from the doctor, but she needs an elevated building. And that was the problem that she was running into because she couldn't find, you know, proper housing for her handicapped daughter. So currently she's staying with someone waiting. She's on the waiting list for an apartment building. The other tenant, I spoke with her, she just recently got her an apartment. She, again, was staying with someone else, but she's moved into her place within the last maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks tops. So this affected us. A lot of us are still living through this. Like for me, I had a 4-bedroom downsized to a 2. I still have a storage bill I have to pay every month because of that move. So we were told that we could move back into the building, but I don't think that's going to happen. So everybody is like moved on, you know, and trying to make the best of it. But a lot of us are still recouping from that move, or trying to at least.
I mean, you just said so much in what you just had to say about the personal, but also I think the systemic, you know, what you said about accessibility. My understanding is that we have a shortage of accessible buildings in Chicago.
Yeah.
And in terms of buildings that are not just accessible, but also affordable. And, you know, across every neighborhood, having those affordable, accessible, and of course, safe and healthy housing. So thank you for sharing that. And it links to another question. I'd like to ask Frank to share a bit more about the relocation assistance dollars and the need for that that's in the ordinance.
Yeah, I mean, the basic concept of relocation assistance isn't hard. If somebody's being compelled to move through no fault of their own, then just in fundamental fairness, they ought to be given some leeway for doing so. Well, we've all heard in recent years of significant percentage of American families and Chicagoans who don't have sufficient savings to meet an unexpected difficulty of even $500. What we know at Lawyers Committee for Better Housing, for doing eviction defense work for 40 years, that the costs of even a working class family or a low income family, the transition cost can easily be in the $3,000 to $7,000 range. Professional movers aside, first month's rent, security deposit, last month's rent, credit checks, et cetera, that you're going to have to pay to the new landlord, beer and pizza to the guys that help you move. And of course, if people are older or they're disabled, moving themselves isn't all that great. So there are some out-of-pocket expenses that one gets hit with that are not in the hundreds of dollars, but in the thousands of dollars. That's a bit much to ask for. A large swatch of the population can't possibly afford that. The bill, as it currently stands, has different triggers for relocation assistance, a general amount that would apply to larger landlords, medium-sized landlords, corporate landlords, and then a smaller amount of assistance that would apply to small landlords. And in Chicago, we have a definition of that. In Chicago, since 1986, we have defined small landlord as being a building of 6 or fewer units where the owner occupies the building. Now, I should say that Chicago is a bit of an outlier in that regard, that when you look at small landlord exemptions in those places where they even exist, the exemption is more in the 2 to 4 unit building range. I think when you start getting into 6 units, even when they're owner occupied, you can tell that these typically are not landlords that are operating on a shoestring. They may not be getting wealthy, but they're certainly not operating on a shoestring. And being able to afford some modest relocation assistance to help those renters, particularly where you're undergoing substantial rehabilitation or you're taking the unit off the market or you're condo converting. These are all situations where there is money available in the transaction, and a portion of that money going to the tenant to help them relocate when they've done nothing wrong seems to be a fair thing to do.
Thank you for sharing that, Frank. Appreciate it. I want to ask Antonio if you could share a bit more about kind of the weekly actions, and how could somebody who, let's say, has, let's say they have 5 or 10 minutes to contribute to this campaign, is that enough time to make a contribution each week to this campaign?
Yeah, I believe so. As I stated, right, I think the minimum ask that we're making out of the public, right, anybody that is invested and wants to make this happen, is to make just a phone call. And right now we're asking for maybe potentially we're putting maybe 1 or 2 targets per week, right, of these other people from the housing committee. So at any point you can see on our social media platforms who is a target. We will provide you the phone number, the email address, and kind of the script to kind of follow. So it's very easy, very simple. We're asking if people can make a call, right, to let us know, to notify us. But even if you don't get a response, leaving a voicemail is very powerful, especially if it's coming from a constituent from that specific alderman or alderwoman. So really important to kind of make that. But of course, that call in itself, right, can take from 2 minutes to 5 minutes, depending on whether you get somebody to answer the phone in itself.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I've been making the calls and the emails, and it doesn't take that long to do that each week. I mean, we're Health and Medicine's involved in other ways as well, but that's probably it's just very simple, and Antonio and the team makes it really simple to do that and participate. And if you can imagine an older person's office getting 100 calls each week, so it takes a lot of us to make that number of calls. So anybody who's participating today, if you join in, that's a big help. And it takes, we need lots of people to be making those phone calls. We have another question that someone's posed about the potential for, this tsunami of eviction filings that, we think may ensue at the end of the moratorium. So they say their impression is that the result will be that there's accumulated past due rent. We know that, and that there might be a need to focus on other policy issues as well to help prevent the tsunami. So, the Justice League is not just focused on just cause for eviction. So I'm wondering, Frank or Antonio or Margie, if you have thoughts on what other policies do we need to protect against not just evictions, but other housing protections.
I'm happy to go first on that. And I would say just a couple of things, Wesley. It's certainly true that everybody anticipates what people are saying, a tsunami of eviction cases being filed, terminations of landlord-tenant relationships. There's no question that post-COVID, most of those are going to be because of non-payment of rent. That would be a just cause under our just cause bill if passed. But I do want to say that our just cause bill would help in many ways. There are other procedural protections in the bill that would make the transition even in non-payment of rent more humane. An important part of our bill that extended the legal time for a tenant to cure non-payment of rent by paying up in full, including court costs and fees. That idea was taken from our bill and used in the mayor's bill in the fair notice bill this past summer, and it's now the law in Chicago. That needs to be expanded upon, as our just cause bill does, and that will be beneficial as well. Now, let's take a step back for a second. Let's analogize the potential tsunami of eviction cases and terminations to the financial crisis of 2007 through 2013 for just a second. There are going to be many, 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 many distressed landlords large and small. This is not a small landlord problem, large and small. There's going to be distressed landlords for reasons that are COVID related and reasons that are not, just because the economy is going to be in rather rough shape, as everybody is predicting later this year and into next year. If history is any lesson, there's going to be a tremendous amount of dislocation of renters as a result of that have nothing to do with non-payment of rent. Unlike in the financial crisis, 2007 to 2013, where a lot of those landlords went through foreclosure, 80,000 Chicago rental units were adversely affected during that time from foreclosure on landlords. Well, this time there's a new component. The new component is that since 2012, not only in Chicago, but nationwide, particularly in cities like Atlanta, more and more venture capital firms are buying up residential rental properties, particularly smaller buildings, Pilsen, Albany Park, South Shore. They're buying up these buildings. And for those venture capital firms, those landlords that own those buildings now, they're not going to go through foreclosure. Those tenants are not going to enjoy the protections of the law that was passed in Chicago in 2013. They're simply going to sell off to these venture capital firms. That was something that wasn't really that prominent back during the financial crisis. So now we're going to see, going into 2021, into 2022, into 2023, the economic difficulties that are caused by the pandemic globally are going to come home to roost in dislocation of tenants, many of whom's distressed landlords are going to be purchased by venture capital firms. Those renters will have next to no protections. They will simply be asked to leave for no reason at all. And if they don't move within a short period of time, they're going to face eviction cases. Again, just like with the financial crisis, we are now going to be faced as a society with a choice. Are we going to prioritize and favor people-centered policies that favor life being conducted in a manner that's humane? Or are we going to favor profit-centered policies and allow dislocation to happen regardless of consequences? Just Cause is going to help in that vein as well.
I think what I would like to add, right, is that in the recent months during the pandemic, I think everybody in our society that is watching or that is hearing kind of the impacts of it in the most vulnerable communities, even prior to the pandemic, knows that there's been a lot of injustices in regards to who is being supported during the pandemic, right? We all know that there's about to be a bill that is going to be giving direct assistance to corporations, to these developers, but no direct assistance is going to be given to tenants, to low-income individuals that currently right now are asking themselves whether they should pay on the balance that they have due on rent from the previous months, right? Or whether they should put food on the table. Nobody should have to make that decision. Nobody should have to even think about one option over the other. But the reality is that landlords are being aggressive to tenants. They're telling them lies. They're doing illegal tactics like illegal lockouts on them, regardless of the middle of the pandemic and the fact that we're still dealing with it. And that is something that we need to change, right? When we say housing is a human right, we know that that's broader than just getting just cause. That means rent control. That means all the reformists like policies. But at the end of the day, what it is for us to imagine, like the creation of real affordable housing in order to house those individuals that really need it, those that are homeless, those that are at the risk of being homeless. And the fact that our incarceration system is the biggest social public housing system that we have in the United States, that to me is an issue that we need to really be critical of and to maintain conversations and dialogues about how we are actually going to escape that fact, that current stage that we are in our housing crisis in the overall nation, besides kind of these just cause and rent control policies that other cities are trying to implement or have already implemented, but that have not really resolved the issue of forced displacement in the communities that are most vulnerable to it.
Thank you. Margie, did you have any thoughts to share on things that you think need to happen in terms of reform or policy change that you'd like to add?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think that this is a very important thing because, like, no one should have to go through what we went through.
That's right. No, I think that that's the essential piece. I mean, one thing that I'm interested in hearing more is from you is the organizing you went through. So how many people were organizing with you?
You know what? It was pretty much me. It was because the building we lived on, it was 2 apartments on each floor, and it was 16 floors, and everybody had to move out. So at first, a lot of people didn't want to listen to what I was trying to say. Once I got like maybe 2 or 3 people, and I asked them to reach out and help me with the other people. And that's how we were able to, get other people involved.
Thank you. I mean, I think it seems to link back to what we talked about throughout the discussion today is the role that power plays, right? So people organizing together, whether within a building or across the city with the Justice League, to change policy to improve people's lives. And so that's, I think, what we're here to talk about. And I really want to thank everybody. We're going to go ahead and close it out. I want to thank everyone, thank our panelists, Frank, Antonio, and Margie, for giving your expertise, your wisdom, your experience, and sharing that with our audience today. I want to thank our audience for joining us. And one last ask is that if you feel moved to join the Justice League in trying to pass just cause, I really hope you will sign up. We'll be sharing links with you so that you have an opportunity to do that. We are, I'd say, on that, I wouldn't say we're at the finish line, we're at the kind of last lap. And hopefully you all can join us and help push it over the finish line in the months ahead. So on behalf of Health and Medicine Policy Research Group and the Chicago Housing Justice League, thank you and have a good night.
Thank you for having me.